ANC support it's going to remain sticky in some areas, but it's also it's hemorrhaging support quite quickly in other places.
What do recent by-elections tell us for the prospects of the current ANC government? What does it tell us potentially about coalition governments going into 2024? Joining me to unpack these issues is Marius Roodt from the Institute of Race Relations. Marius, you're based overseas at the moment, but of course we want to get your insights into local politics in South Africa. So just to start off with, what do recent by-elections tell us about the fortunes of the ANC? And specifically, you could maybe mention the dichotomy between rural versus urban performance.
Yeah, so since the local government elections in November last year, there have been 29 by-elections held in South Africa. There have only been two parties who've stood in every single one of those by-elections. One of them is the ANC. And what's an interesting phenomenon is that in 18 of those by-elections, the ANC's vote share as compared to the local government elections has declined. But in 11 of them, it's actually gone up. So I think it tells you a couple of things there. The ANC is definitely losing support, but its support is often quite sticky in certain areas, particularly rural areas. But another interesting phenomenon, which does show that ANC support is on the slide, is if you look at the 18 wards where these by-elections were held, if you take those as a whole, and if you look at the voting results from the November local government elections, then the ANC's vote share in those wards was just under 50%. But now if you take the combined results from the 29 by-elections, then the ANC vote share dropped to about 44%. So that's a decline of about 5 percentage points in the space of less than a year. So at the same time, you need to be a little bit careful about comparing local government elections to national elections, but there's obviously, you can tell from the trends are often quite similar. The ANC generally does better in national elections than local government elections, but their supporters are more likely to come out to the polls in national elections. But as I say, the trend is pretty clear. In national elections and local government elections, ANC support is on the decline. And as I say, there is definitely a difference between how the ANC does in rural areas and what you could call the rural provinces, places like Mpumalanga, Eastern Cape, out of the big cities, and compared to how it does in places like Gauteng or eThekwini and so on. So there definitely is a difference. And it's part of the long-term, I think, evolution of the ANC, where it's as has happened to, for example, ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe. ZANU-PF is now basically a rural party where in the cities, places like Harare and Bulawayo generally vote for the opposition. And I think there's definitely what's happening in South Africa as well. ANC support is much stronger in rural areas than in our cities. Another good indicator of this is in the 8 metros in South Africa, the ANC only won above 50% of the votes in 2 of them, in Mangaung, so Bloemfontein, and Buffalo City, East London. But if you look at the elections, local government elections from 10 years ago, the ANC was the single biggest party in each of the 8 metros and won about 50% in all of them except for Cape Town. So it shows you how things have changed, and the ANC's it's dropped by 30 percentage points in some of the metros. So ANC support it's going to remain sticky in some areas, but it's also it's hemorrhaging support quite quickly in other places.
Are there any particular signs from within the ruling party that you see them trying to arrest the situation in any serious way? And I'm not talking about wanting to establish an ESCOM 2.0, for example, but in terms of personnel moves, for example, we had the passing of JC Duarte this past weekend. Would that leave a potential vacuum? We've got movements in places like KZN with former Minister of Health, Zweli Mkhize. Are there any names, anything like that stands out to you in terms of how the party is trying to reassure itself heading into 2024?
Not particularly, but that is actually something a bit different from what the ANC has done. Contrary to popular belief, the ANC does actually react to pressure at the ballot box. I think a good example is in 2016 in Nelson Mandela Bay, when the ANC knew before that local government election that it was under pressure to retain the city, and appointed Danny Jordaan as its mayoral candidate there. And what everything about Danny Jordaan, the guy is a decent administrator. He did a good job in running fairly decent job in running the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. So, and he definitely doesn't have the kind of whiff of corruption around him that other people in the ANC do. So he was appointed the mayoral candidate in that city. It didn't help. The ANC still lost to the DA in Port Elizabeth in that election. So the ANC does respond to electoral pressure, or it has in the past, but I'm not sure this is the case anymore. And as we see, the ANC is starting to, I don't think the centre is holding, as that saying goes, and I think we're going to see some interesting things happen possibly in the ANC in the future. It'll be interesting to see now who does take over the Secretary General role, because Ace Magashule has also been, he was the Secretary General and he was fired basically. And Jesse Duarte is now obviously passed away, but I believe Paul Machatile is acting Secretary General. And I think there's probably a good chance he's going to run for a very senior position at the ANC conference at the end of the year. So we'll see what happens with that.
And with recent comments by Ms. Kubai, the ANC's head of policy, as it were, around that investors need to invest in South Africa unconditionally, I don't foresee a serious change in terms of ideology from the party, at least leading up to 2024. Marius, just to get your take on coalition politics and coalition governments, you can obviously highlight particular parties if you think that to be useful, but how do you see that playing out at the moment? And again, how do some of these by-election results tell you how things are going with DA, for example, Action SA, Freedom Front Plus?
So there was something very interesting that happened in the last round of by-elections in Matsikama, which is Vredendal, in the Western Cape. There was a by-election because the Patriotic Alliance councillor, a man, I think his name is Kito Box, he had defected from the Patriotic Alliance to the DA, meaning that there had to be a new by-election in the municipality. But what's interesting is that the Freedom Front Plus in the ward, they actually released a pamphlet that was doing the rounds on the internet and obviously in the city or in the town, saying to their supporters, they are not going to run in this by-election, but they encourage their supporters to support the DA in this by-election. And that actually turned out pretty well for the DA. They got about 20% of the vote in the local government elections in November last year. This went up to 62% of the vote. I think that also, as with by-elections, there's always some internal, some local dynamics. So as I say, the DA candidate had been the PA candidate who'd won that election. So there was probably some personal, he probably enjoyed some personal support. But it was quite interesting that the Freedom Front Plus had come out and explicitly said, support the DA candidate. And they said, so that we can run a stable coalition government in this municipality. And that's exactly what's happened. So now between the DA and the Freedom Front Plus, the DA has 7 seats in the municipality. The Freedom Front Plus has 1 seat. That gives them 8. And the municipality overall has 15 seats. So now they have a stable coalition. Before this, the DA obviously only had 6 seats, the Freedom Front Plus 1, so there have been 7 out of 15, which means they wouldn't have been able to govern alone, the 2 parties. So I think this is something that's pretty interesting. Freedom Front Plus actually hasn't run in any by-elections since November last year, but I think they've been keeping their powder dry for places where they've got a chance of actually winning. I think they'll generally be in marginal DA seats in certain parts of the country. Action SA has now run, I think, in 3 by-elections since 1st November last year. And they've actually done okay in all of them. They got about 20% in, and they've also been doing pretty well in places that are quite demographically different. They've got about 20% of the vote in a ward in Tshwane, which is mostly white, middle class. Then they've got also around about just over 20%, 25% of the vote in a ward in Soweto, which is obviously mainly Black South Africans. And then they just ran in a ward now down in Nelson Mandela Bay, where they got just shy of 10% of the vote. And that was their first electoral foray outside of KwaZulu-Natal or Gauteng. So whatever you may think about Turn Mashaba or Action SA, they do seem to be drawing support from, they might be the first kind of real racial crossover party that South Africa's seen. And on just one other issue, the EFF has had a bit of an uneven performance, but they've taken a couple of awards off the ANC. So it's, they also definitely want to watch. But their support is also uneven. They've some of these by-elections they've run, they get less than a 1% of the votes, and other places they managed to take awards away from the ANC. So their support's also kind of uneven, but I think they're definitely going to be one to watch in 2024. But I think that's probably what most people really think.
Thanks very much for watching. Now we turn it over to you, the viewer. Let us know in the comments below how much one can read into by-election results and what you foresee happening in the national government elections in 2024. Where do you see the ANC's fortunes going, and how do you think coalition politics will shake out over the next 2 years, especially in the bigger metros. Before you leave, please remember to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also share the video with your friends and your contacts and your business colleagues. Until next time, this is Chris Hattingh for the CRA. Take care.